Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me? Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing.
Yes.
Okay, good. Are we starting now? Okay.
We can hear you.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Good evening to all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Abadan daiman again. Thank you for joining us our monthly halakha program. My name is Harun. I am the director of NJ chapter of the NEICC, Northeast Islamic Community Center. I am the director of NJ chapter. I am one of your hosts for this event.
Hello, everybody. My name is Neval Inanır, and I am also host for tonight's program. This program is organized by Northeast Islamic Community Center. You can check us out at islamiccenter.org, as well as follow us on our YouTube channel, where this event is also being live streamed. Please note, schedule and time of this event is fixed. It is at 8:30 p.m. at the first Friday of every month. If you want to be informed beforehand of details of upcoming programs, please text your number to 862-686-2988 to subscribe to our programs. Again, the number is 862-686-2988. You can also contact us through our Gmail, nj@neicc.net. Thank you.
Before we start the program, I would like to share an upcoming incredible event with you. It is a reading contest for our youth and adults about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there is a website you can see under bottom of the program page, www.whoisprophetmuhammad.com. www.whoisprophetmuhammad.com. It's kind of long, and we have 11,500 rewards for both books. So there is also young, one of them is, there is a young version. Yes, this is the, for our age year of 14 years and younger. They have a book. It's very little book, but it's wonderful book about Prophet Muhammad. We are encouraging everyone in North America, including Canada, to join and register, inshallah, for this book reading contest. And there is also, can we go back to the last page for the adults? There are 2 types of books. You can also participate on both of them. However, if you win both competition, obviously we are going to give you one prize for the book. One of them is Martin Lick's books, and we have audio book. It's 5 hours 50 cents, even though 50 minutes. So even though it looks thick, please participate. And the other book is the messenger book. You can buy those books on Amazon and antstores.com. Amazon and antstores.com. Inshallah, we will leave the link in our YouTube channel on chat session and the top of the chat that you can participate and register. Especially after the COVID-19, I think it is very important to reflect the life of the Prophet and learn about those in a sense of life of Prophet Muhammad to shape our future in personal level and in societal level. And before further ado, I would like to explain flow of the program. Program will start with, inshallah, Imam Ismail Kamit with Quran recitation. Then we will have a speech with Imam Khalid. Then we will have a Q&A session. And afterwards, we will have a little prayer with Imam Khalid. And we will have reflections and conclusion remarks. And inshallah, we will read and remember reading contest again. So I would like to start with the Imam Ismail Kamit with the Quran recitation. Brother Ismail.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم آمن الرسول بما أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون كل آمن بالله وملائكته وملائكته وكتبه ورسله لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله وقالوا سمعنا وأطعنا غفرانك ربنا وإليك المصير لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين صدق الله العظيم الفاتحة.
Again, I just want to thank you very much for a beautiful recitation from Imam Ismail Kamid. It was Surah Al-Baqarah verses 285 and 286. And I just want to inform you again, our audience, about Q&A session after this speech. If you have any questions, please write your questions in that chat section. The questions will be answered first come, first serve basis. Tonight, we have a very distinguished speaker with us, Imam Khalid Latif. So we would like to read his bio, first to introduce him further to our audience. Please note, it is very rich and wonderful bio. So for the essence of time, we will summarize with your permission, Imam Khalid.
Imam Khalid Latif is a university chaplain for New York University and executive director of the Islamic Center at NYU. He was appointed the first Muslim chaplain at NYU in 2005. He was also appointed the first Muslim chaplain at Princeton University in 2006. Under his leadership, the Islamic Center at NYU became the first ever established Muslim student center at an institution of higher education in the United States. Imam Latif's exceptional dedication and ability to cross interfaith and cultural lines on a daily basis brought him recognition throughout the city, so much so that in 2007, Mayor Michael Bloomberg nominated Imam Latif to become the youngest chaplain in the history of New York City Police Department at the age of 24. He served in that role for 11 years. Imam Latif was selected as one of 60 New York City leaders to serve on Mayor Bill de Blasio's transition team, helping to recommend and select individuals for key roles in the current New York City administration. Imam Latif has not only managed to solidify the basis of a strong Muslim community at NYU that seeks to emphasize inclusiveness and understanding of others without compromise, but has also worked tirelessly to foster dialogue with people of other faiths in order to clarify misconceptions and encourage mutual education. His work has brought him to share stages with the likes of Pope Francis and Dalai Lama and many grassroots movements. Imam Latif currently serves as a senior fellow with Of Many, or OM, and amongst other things, co-teaches the popular course, Multi-Faith Leadership in the 21st Century, with his good friend, Rabbi Yehuda Sarna. Imam Latif has also featured in numerous media outlets, including the Huffington Post, CNN, and the New York Times, and many more.
It is very impressive. MashaAllah, Barakallah. Imam Khalid, thank you for being the speaker for our last Halapa program of the year 2020. It is an honor to have you here.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you for having me.
And we would like to thank you again for joining, and Mike is yours.
Okay, great. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah, Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. All praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We thank him, we praise him, we glorify him, beseech him to send his choicest salutations upon his most beloved sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam, and upon all those who choose to tread in his path until the last day. When we're looking at this discussion of Islam as a religion of peace, we want to be able to understand where this construct, this language comes from. And quite often for us as minorities in the United States, like many other minority experiences, narrative gets imposed upon us rather than us telling our stories ourselves. This debate of whether Islam is a religion of peace or a religion of violence or something that is even worse than that comes from an overt simplification of many geopolitical realities that utilize that overt simplification as a means of mechanisms to then render policy that impacts the lives of so many, while at the same time increasing the privilege and power of the few. What do I mean by this? Quite often when we look to see who is identified as representing Muslims around the world, it tends to not be the almost 2 billion individuals who live in harmony, peace with their neighbors. And quite often when individuals are identified as being evidence of Islam as something other than a religion of peace, the labels that are being placed upon individuals tends to be from those individuals who are in a space where they have labels imposed upon them through the majority. And religion is then seen as the only absolute reason as to why they're doing what they're doing, as opposed to looking at anything else, the multiple variables and facets that might be present in making them from amongst those who are motivated perhaps by religion, but in large part many other things. And this is an experience that we find if we look at the United States as a case study, as an example, as to how that kind of narrative can get constructed and placed upon individuals. And we as Muslims dealing now with a globalized mechanism and mindset that renders this kind of reality have to understand where in fact it's coming from. I'll give you an example of what it is that I mean. I used to work at Princeton University. I was the first Muslim chaplain at Princeton, and I was 24 years old when that happened. And when I got to Princeton, I was meeting people who were very well known, experts, academics, people who were quite knowledgeable in a lot of different ways. In that first week that I was at Princeton University, I was meeting people like Cornel West and Toni Morrison and one of the then founders of Amazon.com and somebody who was responsible for the resurgence of China's economy. And I wondered, what is it that I'm doing here? And then my second week, I started to get letters from people who had graduated from Princeton University. And they had sent me letters saying things like, we don't want Muslims at Princeton. We don't want your Sharia law at Princeton. Somebody like you should never be at a place like this. One person wrote an entire book, 400 pages, sent it to me and said, read this. It'll explain to you why someone like you doesn't belong in a place like this. And when I went to speak to my supervisors, the heads of religious life at Princeton University, to ask them what was going on and how I should be responding to some of this, their response to me was that these people were under the impression that I was actually now taking on a different role, that the head of religious life at Princeton University was a man by the name of Tom Breitenthal, a really nice man who in that year was leaving his position to go become the Archbishop of Southern Ohio. And because his job was now going to be vacant, the explanation they gave to me was that these people are upset because they thought we were hiring you to be in his role. And I said, well, why couldn't I be the head of religious life? That's not a good answer. That's even worse. Are you saying because I'm Muslim, it's something that I'm not allowed to do? One of the things that became evident there was that this institution of higher education was indicative of many other types of institutions that this country is built upon. At the end of the year, they do something at Princeton where they celebrate alumni and people graduating from their university. It's a very prestigious school. They get the oldest alums possible to march in a parade along with the youngest alumni possible. And they're all wearing orange and white pinstripe suits. And the manner in which this parade takes place around its campus is that the eldest alums, graduates, start off the parade. And at the end of it, it's the younger ones. And you literally see decades and decades and decades of people who have graduated from these elder class years. They're all elderly white males. As some time passes, you see a little bit of sprinkle of some diversity in color, maybe some women, but mostly by the end of it, it's still Caucasian males. One of the things that they did at Princeton University the year I was there, that they do at universities around the country, is they have an unofficial graduation ceremony called the Pan-African Baccalaureate. It's a ceremony that takes place at colleges throughout the United States where students who identify as Black and brown, mostly African American, have their own unofficial graduation ceremony. And they asked me to speak at that ceremony that year. And I remember the young woman who was the valedictorian of that ceremony, she said to her peers something that sticks with me even till today. That she says, just because we are at Princeton does not mean that we are of Princeton. And we have to remember the sacrifices that so many had to go through in order for us to be at a place like this. So our degrees, our training, our credentials should never be to be self-serving, but should always be to advance the common good and what is beneficial for a community at large. I want you to think about this because these structures and systems, these institutions are built off of notions and principles of exclusivity, not inclusivity. This is very different from Islam fundamentally, because Islam as a religion promotes a universality that says that Allah is for everyone. And when you have a God-centered religion, that's very different from an egocentric perspective that puts the individual at the center and the elevation of the nafs through egocentricity, which is what supremacy does. It then has you seek to satisfy your own wants, not only at the expense of your needs, but definitely at the expense of the needs of others. That you start to now dehumanize people. You build policy and systems and structures that could care less what happens to minorities or people of diverse backgrounds. And you seek to only engage in what is going to yield for you a retention of your power and privilege. When we look at COVID-19, in the midst of pandemic, many of you are in New Jersey, I'm in New York City. In the months of April and May, we were at the epicenter of this pandemic. May Allah make things easy for everyone, everywhere, who is facing difficulty as a result of the coronavirus. And you saw that so many systems were just failing in how they met the needs of certain demographics. But quite consistently, we saw from the healthcare system to the immigration system to the education system to the justice system, the prison system, every system pretty much giving indication that it was built for the purpose of meeting the needs of a majority privileged demographic, and quite often at the expense of minorities that come from an underserved and underprivileged background. When you try to understand the aspirations of this and what the roots of it are, we have to see that this construct of Islam as a religion of peace versus Islam as a religion of violence is not rooted in anything theological, because our faith is not hard to conceptualize the way other faiths also have similarities. And I say this to you as somebody who, when the sister was reading my bio, I've shared stages with people like the Pope and the Dalai Lama, do work at that level, but also with local communities. I'm quite often the only Muslim that many people meet. And when I'm in conversation with them and I'm talking to them and I'm sharing my personal narrative with them, they say to me most often, we didn't know that you believe the things that you believe. And I say to them, what you really want to ask me is, why don't we like you so much? Why don't we like your people so much? And I'll tell them that the challenges you have with my religion have nothing to do with theology, because I have a God that I pray to the way you have a God that you pray to. I have holidays, you have holidays. I have prayer and charity and fasting, you have prayer and charity and fasting. We can understand that at some level. But where these challenges come from are not rooted in theological distinctions or the presence of distinct theologies, but it stems from what many countries have struggled with. Definitely this country at the forefront, and it's globalized it, are elements around race and class. To me, anti-Muslim sentiment is very much symptomatic of a deeply entrenched anti-Blackness that this country is built upon. And to recognize and understand that the aspiration of those who came to the United States to build a land of diversity was very distinct from the European context from which people were leaving. And where and how you had individuals who were launching crusades and transatlantic slave trades in the name of religion in the European sphere, and then they embrace a liberalism and a secularism as a solution and an antidote, rather than really dealing with what the actual root causes were of these challenges that they were facing. In the United States, they didn't fight their worst battle or war in the name of any religious or spiritual tradition. But the worst battle, the worst war in the United States, its civil war, was fought around issues stemming from race and ethnicity. That literally the foundational documents of this country afforded full privilege to people who were white males. Women were given nothing, and Black men and women weren't even considered to be a full person in comparison to their white counterparts. And that's the same way that these challenges are manifesting in the world today. That there's a lot of people that we see in the midst of COVID-19 who are running to help people, to want to be connected, to support people in their time of need. But there's so many people who they just don't want to be connected to people who are different from them. And they utilize the opportunity of people being separate from one another to then impose stories. You look at it the way that our country has gone from a stratification of society that begins with slavery of Black people in the United States. You then go from slavery to what's called Jim Crow. Policies, laws that are put into place that act to further segregate on racial demographics and reinstitute the stratification of the society that mistreats Black people. And then it builds itself into mass incarceration. Mass incarceration sees now a synergy between government and media that helps to shape people's opinions of demographics. So you have, for example, politicians that are running for president that are launching a war on drugs. Crack cocaine goes into mostly Black neighborhoods, and they use every justification to now put people into prison who are African American on the slightest of infractions. Politicians start to utilize terms like predator and thug when they're talking about Black people. And then on TV, you start to see TV shows like Cops that air on national television, usually showing white males in blue uniforms arresting Black people to reinforce those same stereotypes. And this is all happening as a broader population sits back and simply watches the lives of hundreds and thousands of innocent Black families get devastated and disrupted from a policy that purposely targets them. The war on terror does not build itself out any differently. Terminologies like Islamist, jihadist, fundamentalist, terrorist, used by politicians across the board. TV shows like 24 and Homeland that build out characters whose sole purpose is to fight the bad guy or evil, which is just usually a Muslim person in Islam. And it then creates both a domestic and international policy that sees mass deportation, the building out of things like Guantanamo Bay, people put into solitary confinement, an international policy that leads to the destabilization of much of the Middle East, going under the guise of weapons of mass destruction, but really in pursuit of oil resources that destroys the infrastructure of Iraq, of Afghanistan, and so much of the rest of the world. And this construct of Islam as a religion of peace, Islam as a religion of violence, it all fits into that same mode. And it's something that has happened consistently and constantly over the course of many years, many decades. And for us to understand, well, how do we respond to it? It necessitates us, first and foremost, learning how dynamics of power actually function and how these stories get constructed and why we cannot fall subservient to them. Our practice of our deen is such that whether people love us or they dislike us, we're supposed to do good just because it's the right thing to do. And the validation and affirmation that we seek is not one that's rooted in worldly gain, but there still needs to be strategy nonetheless in being able to understand how to move forward on this. If you want to learn and recognize a little bit more as to how you can approach it, I would say that you should read a book that's called The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. You should watch a documentary that's called 13th that will give you a lot of insight as to how these narratives are constructed, as to how media helps to build it, as to how government promotes it. You literally have people who are part of the Nixon presidential campaign who go on the record as saying that part of their political strategy was to demonize and vilify people who they called hippies and people who were Black. They wanted to get the public to now be in a place where they were rallying against these people. They were creating these strategies because their care wasn't as such as to, well, what would happen to these minorities? The focus was, how do we retain our power dynamics? So what can we do in the midst of this? And I say this to you as somebody who, you heard a little bit of my bio. I've been recipient of numerous awards. I meet with people who are heads of state. I have been on the cover of Newsweek magazine, interviewed by Katie Couric and Stephen Colbert. I've still had the FBI in my house. The first time the FBI visited me was when President Obama was the president, and a week earlier, the head of his intelligence unit, John Brennan, had come to our Islamic Center and done a event with us in conjunction with the White House, where he got up on stage and said that Imam Latif President Obama has received a letter that you had written to him, and he sees you as a great American, etc., etc. And it's all online. You can find it. He says this. And then a week later, there's somebody knocking on my door, and it's the FBI wanting to talk to me. And the next day, they meet me at my car on the street. They follow me to my office. And in the midst of the conversation, I say to them that, what is it that you really want from me? And they say, you're just too good to be true. Know that we're watching you. That can have a very shackling effect. It can have a very chilling effect. I was a very young person at that time. And I can tell you that it's not easy. Constantly looking over your shoulder, worried about friends and family. These are very real things. And I can tell you, as somebody who's gone through that, somebody who's been detained, somebody who's been surveilled, profiled, despite the connections that I have, two things. One, I still couldn't tell you what it's like to be a Black person living in this country. And two, I'm still sitting here in front of you. That anything that gets imposed that's physical is still something we can work through. But the minute we give people an opportunity to take over us psychologically and start to shackle us there, then we've given them victory over us. Our job is to not go out and reactively say that Islam is a religion of peace. Our job is to simply just live our faith, our values, our ethics, to not have to react to a supremacist system that's going to constantly tell us that the primordial state of existence is rooted in its supremacist ideologies. When in our tradition, the primordial state of existence is the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who calls towards beauty and ethics, does not call to anything nafsi, teaches us to support one another, epitomizes verses of the Quran in every which way, shape, or form, tells us to be people of good conduct, to be a source of benefit for the society around us, and to just try our best. And so where everybody is in a space where governments in places like France can do abhorrent things, and may Allah make things easy for our brothers and sisters in France, where they can very easily just throw a label of terrorism and violence and create a stereotype that yields mass hysteria. We build coalitions and collaborations with the people who make the most sense. As a first step, what you could do practically is recognize that there has to be strategy. You have a beautiful community and you want to think about what is your local impact in the city around you. How do you recognize through the diversity of your community that you can learn lessons from those who have been in the United States for a long time, not simply from their being American, but how they dealt with all of these things? 30% of slaves that were brought over in the transatlantic slave trade are said to be Muslim. And over the course of centuries, Islam has thrived within the Black American Muslim experience in the United States. And you sit down and you speak to elders, leaders in the African American community, and you say that, what do we do? How did you do it? Where can we learn from the precedent that you've set when media only does this and government does this? And just listen and absorb. And then you build strategy for your community that says that we've been blessed with a great masjid. What is the next year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years going to look like? So that we continue to build and we continue to grow, and there's a vision and a strategy. Because organized evil will always triumph over disorganized righteousness. This is a truth that we have to embrace. And there's going to always be people who are going to say that we are something other than what we actually are. We just got to keep striving and striding ensuring that we are taking care of one another, and that we are going out and building for ourselves what we can't expect for anybody else to build for us. This is not going to be something that gets answered simply through language and rhetoric and conversation. To be able to break down systems, you have to build your own systems. To take on something that's structural and institutional, you got to build sound institutions. And you think about it on a generational level. And then you just try your best, because that's what Allah wants from us at the end of the day. And you have to have hope and recognize that people are going to still do everything that is within their power to see and be called towards values and consciousness. And I believe that. I believe in what the Quran teaches us, that we have both capacity to do good and to do not good, right? لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. That we have created man in the most beautiful of forms. And then a paradox is introduced in Surah At-Tin, ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ, and then we let them fall to the lowest of the low. And that means the human has the capacity to embrace their purpose of being molded in this most beautiful form, that we can be agents of real beauty. Or we can evidence the verse that comes after, the lowest of the low, but within us is also capacity, paradoxically, to be agents of real difficulty, of real ugliness. How do we start? You want to take time to reflect. You want to silence what some of it is that supremacy calls us towards. That it's psychological in such a way that it teaches us to chase after dunya and to look after things in the most simplistic of forms. But our deen teaches us to want to have real basira, a vision of the heart. That with modernity, there's a lot of growth and there's a lot of amazing opportunities technologically. We're literally in a pandemic and we are still gathered together, all in different homes in different parts of the cities. That's remarkable if you really think about it, subhanAllah. But with modernity too, there becomes some challenges. And of the challenges of modernity, one, there becomes an absence of spaces of stillness and reflection. Two, there's a very pervasive form of loneliness that exists within the prism of modernity. And three, with modernity, there becomes a lessening of depth of perspective. That we have, for example, the character that is known as Dajjal in our tradition. May Allah protect us from his fitna. And Dajjal, he is known and described as being one-eyed in the hadith. But Allah tells us in Surah Al-Balad that he's made us with two eyes. Alam naj'al lahu aynayn, it says, did we not make him with two eyes? And in the most literal sense, Dajjal, who comes at the end of times, is going to have this one eye, and we have two eyes. But in a more esoteric sense, the idea is such that we are people with two eyes. We have outward and inward vision. And Dajjal as a being will only be able to see in one direction, either outwardly or inwardly. But we're supposed to see both ways. And because he comes at the end of time, that means that with modernity, there's going to be now a lessening of that depth of perspective. People are going to only be able to see one way or the other way. We're supposed to see both ways, to aspire towards depth, in a sense of real husn inwardly, to not have religion that's just ritualistic as an ends, but a means to something. And Allah blessed you with a community that's quite beautiful, that has people from different backgrounds, and you want to learn from one another, that has opportunities to understand and hear stories, lived experiences that are quite different from your own. What does your community know of the people who are parts of it, who have lost their jobs in the midst of pandemic? What do they know of the people who somehow live in a country where 5.5 million people in the midst of a global pandemic lost healthcare? What do they know of individuals who are part of the statistics in your community, who have for the last months been amongst those numbers of rising rates of domestic violence because people are at home with their abusers. May Allah make things easy for them. What do we know of the people who's living alone, who are ill and there's no one checking in on them? How do we see the disparities, the discrepancies? You have the ability to think about this on a grand level. But my personal philosophy is that local impact that will then allow for spheres of influence to increase is likely going to be that much more sustainable. Because if you think how your masjid can change the world, like that's one way to approach it, or how things exist on a national federal level, that's another way to approach it. Or if you think about just the mile radius around your community center, or 2 miles or 3 miles, and you start to bear impact and influence strategically. And every year it's growing and growing and growing. And you become the source of illumination, the source of light for the people around you, so that the circles who are there within your immediate proximity, they're the ones who are going to speak on your behalf because they feel the benefit of your presence. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he is with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they have a deep friendship. And before there's a hijrah to Medina, Abu Bakr comes and he asks the Prophet if he can just leave from Mecca. The Prophet gives him permission. The people have made it very hard for him to worship God. And as he's leaving, a man who's not Muslim, his name is Ibn Daghina, he says to Abu Bakr, "Where are you going?" And he says that it's been made hard for me to worship my God here. I'm going to go someplace else. And Ibn Daghina, who is not Muslim, says to Abu Bakr that you can't go, because if people like you start to leave from our society, then our whole society will suffer from your loss. And so he goes to the mushrikeen of Mecca, the chieftains, and says that Abu Bakr is under my protection. And he looks after him because he sees the value of Abu Bakr. But what's really important to understand of this story is that first point, that Abu Bakr's ethics in Islam have others around him who speak out on his behalf. But as the story continues, Abu Bakr, he's told that you got to pray in your house, because when he recites out loud, people start to get attracted to his recitation. And the Meccans, they complain to Ibn Daghina that he's still bringing people towards him. And Ibn Daghina, he says that, look, you got to stop this, or you can't be under my protection anymore. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he says to him, then I don't need your protection. Because he's not looking for supporters and allies that only accept him when he becomes other than that which he actually is. He's going to pray to his God. He's going to be Muslim. He's going to be unapologetically Muslim and never seek to believe that a part of his religious identity is something that makes him lesser than anyone else. And so he says to Ibn Daghina that you can take your protection back, because he's not willing to compromise on something that shouldn't be compromised upon. So you want, as a community, to live your Islam in such a way that the people around you will stand up and scream if you suddenly are not there anymore, because they feel your benefit so much that your absence is something that they can't have. But you also want to be living your Islam in such a way where somebody says, we're going to only accept you if you let go of certain parts of your identity, that you say, then I don't need your support. I don't need your allyship. I can't be only with you when you tell me I have to be other than what it is that I am, that there's certain things I can't compromise on. You start investing in leadership. You build out staffing that can fill certain gaps. You give young people the opportunity to pick up the skills and the trainings, and you build interdisciplinary modes of engagement. There are about, right now, 80 people that are listening to this, which is 80 households, not 80 individuals. Even if it was just one person per login on Zoom and on YouTube, that's 80 people But even if there's on average 2 people or 3 people, that's 120 or 180 people listening right now. You all have skills as doctors and social workers and financial professionals and entrepreneurs, graphic designers, web developers, software engineers, chemical engineers, across the gamut, artists, academics, activists. You represent every skill and every talent needed to be able to build sound strategic institutions. Allah gave you and I imaginations for a reason. He gave us creativity for a reason. It's not that we just take from others reactively, but we feel a sense of exhilaration to say that we're going to go and build. Think about it right now, how much people are hurting. People are in real pain in the midst of this pandemic. And you could turn to your community members and say, what are we going to build that we know that people will need a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? And if it's not Muslims who are building it, who else is going to build it? You're going to turn to your friends, your close circles, and say that how can we come together to ensure that we are the reason people have hope in this world, never the reason that people might dread it. There's always been people who attach labels to minority populations. There's always been people who called underserved and underprivileged individuals things that they are not. Don't identify yourself through them. Recognize them, acknowledge them, work in the prism of reality, but then get done what you have the ability to get done, so that what you're leaving behind for the next generation to build upon is going to give them that much more of a step forward in terms of what they then grow it into. And that's what our hadith teaches us. The Prophet ﷺ, he says that even if you know that the hour is upon you and you're about to plant a seed, still go ahead and plant the seed. Don't stop. And so you've laid a great foundation with this institution as your masjid community center. What are you going to do next? And how will you leverage it? And not just because someone thinks so or someone wants to, but with real data, real analysis. Bring together the people who can create metrics of assessment and then figure out, what are we going to do? What are we going to build? I run a student-based community at New York University that I'm blessed to be a part of. In the aftermath of COVID, within 4 months, our student-based community raised over $2.5 million to assist people with COVID relief funding. In October, we signed a building that we closed on that's going to be a shelter for women and children who are survivors of domestic violence and abuse. 40,000 people contributed to help us raise that $2.5 million. That means an average donation of $75 per person. Not anybody writing $1 million check, which is amazing. You should if you have the means to. But it's a lot of people coming together on principles of shared ethics and values, believing that the $1 that they give is going to be just as impactful as anything else, and that their individual contribution is going to be part of something bigger that's going to then help others in their time of need. And that's what good religion is. Good religion is not self-serving. Good religion should bring its practitioner to take on societal ills and ailments. And if our religious practice does not bring us to a place where we are bringing betterment to the people around us, and we are not dismantling inequitous systems, and we are not seeking to remedy social ailments, then what's the point of our religion? And right now, the worst social illness that exists is the social illness of racism. And we are uniquely poised as a community to answer through our tradition this plague that is really destroying people. And I know that I'm going past the time. I apologize, I didn't look at the clock. I pray, inshallah ta'ala, that you all are continue to be blessed in the growth of your community, and Allah makes you a means through which He brings real strength, hope, love, and mercy to His creation. And if I could be helpful to any of you, if any of you have to leave before we start a discussion and a Q&A session, which is fine, if I can be helpful to any of you in anything you have going on, please don't hesitate in reaching out. It would be my honor to assist you in whatever ways that I can. Whenever all of this is done and things open up again, if you are ever in New York City, please do visit our center. It would be an honor to host you there. But if this is the only time that we are meant to be together, I pray, inshallah ta'ala, Allah Azza wa Jal gathers us all together again in the best of places in the world beyond this one. But please keep me in your prayers. You and I, you and your loved ones will be in my prayers. May Allah give to you all only the best in this world and the best in the next. I think we're going to do a Q&A, after which we'll do a dua together if people want to stick around for that. Barakallahu feekum, jazakumullah khair, wallahu ta'ala alam, wa billahi tawfiq, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu.
Imam Khalid, thank you very much for this strong and, honest reflection on inner and outward, action, reaction. These are, I think, keywords, that we have to, strive for betterness all the time, for our, personal level, and also for the society around us, without ignoring the need of, local community, and start with small steps. So I would like to start with the questions regarding the, post-pandemic or, pandemic. You were at the core of the, pandemic center like New York City, big, huge, crowded area that has, many incidents. What kind of takeaways you took, personal level, inner core level, what Allah is trying to show us, in personal level and community level, which you already touched, but I want to see if you want to, say and add more thing, because I think we cut you short and I want to give you more time.
I think one of the things that comes up when we have difficulty like this pandemic and difficulty in general is that difficulty gives us revelations. It gives us insight into different things. And there's 4 revelations that I've taken from COVID. One, a revelation of what real goodness actually is. And you see this example in first line responders, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, essential workers, people who bring us our groceries, truck drivers, postal workers, all of these people who are out there meeting the virus head on. That in New York City, when everything first started happening, there weren't nights for months that you didn't hear sirens going off at the late hours, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. 30,000 people died in New York City, subhanAllah. And in my community, I know of 4 doctors that passed away because they contracted COVID-19, serving and trying to heal patients who had it themselves. And one doctor said to me, who wasn't particularly religious in her own words, that I've always tried to figure out what my purpose is and what life means. And in the midst of all of this, I found something that I'm willing to lose my life for, because if me losing my life trying to save someone else's life is the thing that needs to happen for someone else to be okay, then I'm happy to give my life so that someone else can be better. There's people who are made like that, a real revelation of real beauty, real goodness, pure selflessness. And then a second revelation, I would say, is a revelation of real ugliness, the opposite. People who are making decisions and choices through self-interest and egocentricity and selfishness. Policymakers who are creating policy that have no consideration of anyone other than the majority and the privileged demographics. You see people who own jobs, restaurants, other places of work, creating needs for essential workers to not even be able to choose whether they could go to work or not. That in New York City, where you had streets that were empty in Manhattan and things that were not really going so well in April and May, but you could find subways coming from the outer boroughs into the Manhattan that was packed, usually with people who are Black, because they were performing the essential worker tasks and they couldn't decide whether they would go to work or not because their bosses would only pay them if they went to work. That's a problem. The third revelation, I would say, is a revelation of how race and class undeniably, yet again we are shown, decides who has and who has not. That statistically, people who are Black and brown were getting sick and dying at twice the numbers, if not more, in comparison to their white counterparts. And this stems from how we have things broken down systemically. But it's something that's just evident. And I would say a fourth revelation that comes is a revelation of the self. That how did any one of us individually respond to all of it? That what did I do in the last 4 or 5 months? Have I picked up a phone and just called someone that I know is alone to see if they're doing okay? Someone who's elderly and doesn't have anyone looking after them? Somebody who lost a loved one and can't really be with them? A convert who might be at home with a non-Muslim family that doesn't even know that they're Muslim, or a family that's antagonistic towards Islam, or a family that might be supportive but still doesn't understand their religion and doesn't know how to function with them. What about a woman or a child who's at home for the last 4 months with an abusive father or husband? What about people who are stuck in places where they're just dealing with this all by themselves? Did I find myself in a place where I was focused more on what was not there as opposed to what was there? And do I feel like who I am right now could really stand in front of Allah and say that, Ya Rab, I did what I could in those days, that I got done what I was able to get done? I told some friends of mine, I told my wife in the midst of a lot of this, I have a father who's a doctor, I have an uncle who's a doctor, a lot of my cousins are doctors, family members are doctors. I'm not a doctor. But in the first time in my life, I've regretted not being a doctor. And I've wanted so badly to be a doctor, especially in April and May, so that I could just go and be where people needed the most help and support, but I wasn't allowed to because of the restrictions at that time, and even now. And so I would say that these were certain things that I was thinking about and really reflecting on. I think other things that we have to remember is that COVID showed us that we don't actually need so much of what society tells us that we need. That many of us lived without going to the shopping malls and the restaurants so much, and we survived in where we are. And this consumer-driven society tells us that our happiness is attached to buying what it is that they sell to us. That you likely have never watched a commercial for a restaurant or a business that's selling you a product where there are people eating and they look sad and miserable eating at the place. They look happy because what they're telling you psychologically is that if you buy this, you're going to be happy too. But so many of us were able to get through so much without having these many possessions. Like if I asked all of you who are listening right now that, did you have a good day today or a bad day today? And then I said, why? What made your day good or bad? And then you write down a list of things. And as you look at that list or you put it in your head, what made it good or bad? I'll then ask you, do you want to have a good day tomorrow? Do you want to have a good day next week? And what's going to make it good for you? And if the things that you write down are things that exist outside of you, external to you, versus things that are inward and internal, you're setting yourself up for dissatisfaction. Because if we attach our contentment to things outside of us, then what are we going to be when those things are not in our presence? But if our contentment comes from the inward, then we can have that sense of stability wherever it is that we are. Ali radiallahu anh, he says that detachment isn't to not own anything of the world, but detachment is to not let anything of the world own you. That you are in a place where you can possess things, but they don't possess you. And we live in a society where there's a reason as to why we all run to buy the next version of this and spend hundreds of dollars on it, even though we're using it the same way that we use the one that we bought before. And there's a reason why these things have logos on the outside. The clothes that you wear have the brand names external. The cars that you drive have ornaments on the hood, because our identity becomes attached to these things. And we start to find meaning in elsewhere. So we're not rooted in this state of agitation inwardly, because we need things outside of us in order to find a certain sense of peace and stability. If that makes sense. Sorry, I know I talk a lot, so forgive me for that. I can be pretty long-winded.
I think there is a reason Allah made us connection with you, Imam. And I think a personal level, at least I can tell myself I needed this. In inner, look at it, too much attachment to, external things to measure our happiness, not inner thing or sharing. Thank you. Sister Nawal, do we have some questions?
Yes, we do. So the first question that we got is, how can we overcome stereotyping?
Well, stereotyping is a cognitive function. So everybody stereotypes. It's just the way our minds are built. So you can't overcome stereotyping, because if you did, then you'd lose your mind, right? Stereotyping as a function cognitively helps us to store information so that we don't have to think and process things so much. Like my 5-year-old, he learns that green means go and red means stop. So that when he sees a red sign, he stops. That's a cognitive function. It's a form of stereotyping. The challenge that comes in with stereotyping is that it can create an intellectual laziness as well. Things are not absolutely good or bad or right or wrong. They're tools, they're vehicles, and how we utilize them are extensions of understandings of ourselves. Like we're using this live stream right now in a way that inshallah is beneficial. People can use computers to do all kinds of terrible things. The thing is not about a computer being good or bad, but it's just telling you about what you're doing, how you utilize it. So with stereotypes, they can be positive stereotypes and negative stereotypes. Where you have negative stereotypes, they can now be rooted in prejudicial behavior. The word prejudge is literally in it. And where that prejudicial behavior can now elevate itself to an action that's discriminatory, that you mistreat someone, you abuse someone, you have xenophobic attitudes, but discrimination is in an act. Prejudice is within your mindset. You have stereotypes that can form a base for it. Why do we do this? It's not enough to say that it's good or bad, but we want to understand it from a sociological standpoint. Social identity theory tells us that we as people are attracted to similarity and familiarity. So when masjids tend to be mostly one ethnicity or one culture, just like churches and synagogues and other places, is because people find a certain sense of security when they're surrounded by people who are like them. And there's not problems with this. It's not a good or a bad, it's just a thing. People can get you when they are from your background. They can speak your language. But it can also create now challenges. We create in-groups and out-groups. And what happens in our fundamental identification is that we get to a place where there's 3 steps in how we identify, whether it's conscious or not. The first step in affirming our identity is in recognition of just categories that we can find ourselves in, that we see the world in boxes: race, class, ethnicity, age, profession, gender, height, weight, skin color, eye color, hair color, whether you have a beard or not, you wear glasses or not, you're whatever else, you have siblings, you're married. You could go on and on. The boxes are infinite. The second step in this is that we self-categorize. We place ourselves in boxes, consciously or unconsciously. So I am Muslim, I am American, I am New Yorker, I'm a husband, a father, a son, a brother, a professor, a chaplain, an imam. I can go on and on. I'm short, I'm bearded, I'm wearing contacts. And then the third step is comparison. That we start to recognize who it is that we are by saying what it is that we're not. So I know that I'm Muslim because I'm not Christian. I know that I'm short because I'm not tall. I can affirm identity variables through this mode of engagement. The challenge that comes in now is that when you have external modes of identification, an outward process of identity versus an inward out process, we are people who not only exaggerate differences, but as humans, we also exaggerate similarities. And it's not that we're able or unable to connect to people that come from different backgrounds, but if you are different from me and my sense of self and identity is attached to externals that I share with people, common race, ethnicity, class, as opposed to shared internals, shared values, shared hearts, you being different from me creates unease within me because I don't know how to be myself unless you are just like me. And I become afraid. I become anxious. I start to retreat back into that similarity and familiarity. I don't know where else to go. And it's all sociological. And so you get to a place where you can build relationships by actually connecting to people and being with people rather than just being with the stereotypes of them. How can you love somebody who is different from you if you have never been with them? You can actually think about something, not having met someone from a certain background whatsoever. But you can't build real mahabba for someone. And this becomes a condition of the completion of our iman, right? There's many hadith that say, you will not enter paradise until you believe. And may Allah make us from the mu'mineen and dwellers of his Jannah. You will not enter paradise until you believe, and in one hadith, you will not believe until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. You will not enter paradise until you believe, and you will not believe until you love one another. Hatta tuhabu, it's reflexive. Imam Nawawi, rahimahullah, whose 40 hadith people study across ideological schools of thought within Sunni Islam, he says that that word brother in that hadith is not in reference to your brother in faith, but your brother in humanity. And the word hub, muhabba, that's used, it has a derivative that shares a common root with the word for seed in Arabic, habba. And the relationship between love, which is hub, and a seed, which is habba, is that you can take a seed and just throw it into the ground and hope that it does something. But for a seed to actually yield you something, you got to look over it. You got to watch over it. You got to nurture it and care it. And the beauty of a seed that's looked after is that it never just gives you a seed back. It gives you so much more than that. And so in order for you to build that mahabba that's going to be conditional for your own faith, your own iman being complete, you got to spend time with people, cultivate relationships with them. How often at your dinner table are the faces that sit across from your face different from your own in terms of cultural background, country of origin? How many times do you know of people in your broader cultural community, not your religious community, who will not let their children marry people from different races or ethnicities or cultural heritages or cultures of origins? Aside from that being haram, it's racist. It's giving you an insight into something. And you want to think about how those little things help to then break down the stereotypes, the preconceived ideas and notions that can lead to the prejudgments that is the base of prejudice, prejudged, that can then create discriminatory behavior. And even if for no other reason, you just remember that all of us are going to stand in front of Allah one day. And we're going to have to be able to explain why we did what we did, but also why we didn't do what we didn't do. And you look within yourself and you say, what would somebody have to look like in order for me to not be there for them? What part of the world would they need to come from? What would their racial, ethnic, cultural background need to be where I could justify not supporting them in some way? But then don't be a community that when somebody converts to the religion, you jump up and down at their shahada, but you let that person go eat by themselves at a diner on the day of Eid because nobody invited them to celebrate. Or you ain't let them marry your kid because what if they don't stay Muslim? Then the 2 points are contradictory to each other, and you're adopting the mindset that's based in a stereotype, and you've forgotten who your teacher is, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but you're taking teachings from the people who are constructing this idea that Islam is a religion of violence, or making you prove that it's a religion of peace to begin with. And that's not who you want to take your lessons from. Take it from the best of creation, sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Thank you so much for that very in-depth explanation. I will move on to the second question. How do you explain ISIS and other terrorist organizations when they claim they act on behalf of Islam?
I mean, one, I don't have to explain anything to anybody, and you don't have to suddenly represent all of Islam to all people. When we talk about supremacy, you got to understand what it is, right? And it talks about itself as the primordial state of existence. Supremacy is something as such that's going to always tell you and I that we are in comparison to it, that we have to aspire towards it even though we will never reach it. That it will not be us that's on the billboards. It will not be us that sets the normative understandings of beauty and what is socially acceptable. It also always says that we're from someplace else, right? I was taking my students out before COVID for lunch, and there was about 20 of us at a chicken and rice cart near our Islamic Center in Manhattan. And there was a crowd of us now gathered, about 20, and this middle-aged Caucasian woman started to push her way through our group saying, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, can't you understand what I'm saying? And when she got to the front of the line, she saw me and looked at me face to face and said, oh, I guess you can't understand what I'm saying. Tell me, how do they say excuse me where you come from? And I said, we say excuse me. And she said, no, the place where your family's from, how do they say excuse me there? And I said, my family's from Jersey, and we say excuse me. She couldn't understand how somebody that looks like this is actually from the same place as her. We're always from someplace else, which is a challenge. And this is why, as a community, you want to aspire, as much as you have outward engagement, inward engagement as well. And you bridge racial divides that don't tokenize racial diversity, but you embrace racial diversity. That immigrants and indigenous Muslims have deep divides in large part because of immigrant Muslims, not because of indigenous Muslims. And it stems from this supremacist mindset. In our collective histories, we have realities of slavery, colonization, imperialism. There is transgenerational psychological impact from these things. Supremacy also says that why we do what we do always has to have a reason. But there's times when people who, wherever they are in the world, America, Canada, Europe, New Zealand, they're exactly where they're supposed to be, and what they're doing never needs to have a reason behind it. And somebody comes at you and they tell you that you have to suddenly represent all Muslims and all of Islam. Like, no, you don't. You're just you. And somebody says to you to give you an explanation of ISIS, why do you have to do that? If you want to engage in a conversation, you can create for yourself a lot of distinct understandings and read policy papers, but you want to just make sure that the conversation you're having is actually one that makes sense to have. That is the person on the other end actually wanting to receive what it is that you're giving to them? Or is it just a metric of assessment through supremacist vision that's trying to determine how American you actually are or how supportive you actually are? And people's historical mindset becomes quite limited. There's a great TED talk that you should listen to by a woman named Chimamanda Adichie that's called The Danger of the Single Story. And she talks about how the single story gets imposed upon minorities. Who gets to decide where the story is taught? Who gets to decide how history is written? It's usually people who are powerful, the people who are in privileged demographics. And is somebody always imposing narratives of terrorism or putting you in a security box, an immigration box? You got to understand that you're much bigger than that. And you don't have to be reactive to anybody. Somebody wants to understand about you. If you want to speak to them, you can, but it's not your responsibility to go out and deal with their ignorances. And where it becomes like trivia knowledge, there's definitely complexity that takes place in these geopolitical realities. Are there Muslims who do dumb things in the name of Islam? Of course. The Quran is a book, and the danger of scripture and text is that you can turn it into whatever it is that you want to at the end of the day. But so too, the amplification of a narrative that equates the normative understanding of Islam to be something that is inherently violent or radicalized in its nature is something that is a narrative that's imposed upon us. If somebody wants to understand ISIS, give them a bunch of articles to read. Somebody wants to really sit down and engage you in conversation, direct them to people who are not Muslim, who have written books, entire like volumes of books that speak about how it's a gross simplification to say that religion alone is the only variable through which people are acting in these ways. But there's so much more that goes into it, and that complexity is not recognized because when you think of a simple variable, you can then think of just a simple solution, and it doesn't even fix the problem because you're not actually addressing what the root causes of the problem are. You're just vilifying and demonizing an entire demographic in hopes of, again, power retention. That makes sense.
Yes, it makes perfect sense. Moving on to the third question is, how can we support our kids and teenagers in the midst of pandemic and among all of those anti-Muslim responses or views?
It's really hard right now to be Muslim, and we should understand that. And I would say, one, you want to make sure that right now more than ever, you're giving your children affirmation and validation of their emotions. The Prophet ﷺ would tell the children in his life that he loves them. He would support them. He would give them self-esteem and confidence by spending time with them, listening to them, hearing them, not just telling them or explaining to them. His daughter, radiallahu ta'ala anha, Fatima, she, in her many nicknames, was called Abiha, the mother of her father. That was a relationship that they had, that dynamic. Hassan and Hussein radiallahu anhuma were young boys who the Prophet would make dua constantly, that Ya Allah, love them as I love them. He would play games with them. He would kiss them. He would come from the mimbar down when he saw them approaching and embrace them and carry them. He'd be in sujood and they'd come on his back and he'd just be still. They're able to then have a certain sense of confidence and self-esteem. And so one, you recognize that it's hard right now for a lot of people, especially young people who are in the midst of all of this. They don't need formulaic partners, processes of success. They don't need to only be told when they do things wrong or mistakes that they make. They need to hear that you love them and you're proud of them. And that if you have to tell them something that's harsh, make sure you tell them 10 things that are positive to balance it out. Kids who are up to 7 years of age, they can't even process things for the most part. They're all just absorbing and recording like a sponge, and you're shaping their core beliefs in the way that you speak to them, as well as the ways that you don't speak to them. I could tell you, again, you read some of my bio, and you could say, well, look at the things that this guy does. When I was in New Jersey a few years ago, my father, about 3 years ago, had a very severe stroke. If you could make dua for him and his shifa, it left him paralyzed on the right side of his body and without the ability to speak. And he still hasn't regained it. And with COVID, it became more difficult for him to get the medical support he was needing, the therapies and stuff. But prior to COVID, I had gone to give a lecture in New Jersey. And my mother and my father, they came with me. They lived in Central Jersey. There's about 500 people there, and my parents were sitting right in the front row. And I went to their home to have dinner with them after. And as we wrapped up, my schedule tends to have me in a lot of different places all over the place. And so I ate dinner, I sat for a little bit, and then I went to come back to New York City. And my father, who is now 74 years old, was close to 70 when this was happening, elder, Pakistani, Punjabi, Kashmiri man, comes from a culture where everybody can make an excuse about saying, well, culturally, we don't tell our kids that we love them or this and that, whatever. He says to me, Khalid, can you hold on a second? And I said, okay. And I waited by the door, and he walked over to me. He put his hands on my face, kissed me on my forehead, and he said, I want you to know that you spoke really well today, and I'm very proud of you. In any award, any media interview, any celebrity I've met, any meeting with heads of state, whatever, none of that can even come close to the strength and energy that one sentiment and that one kiss from my father gave to me. And I'm a grown man. I have my own kids. And it still has that impact on me. So just think about what your kids really need. You don't want to pass your stress on to them. You want to stop intergenerational pain, right? We're taught that hurt people hurt people. That if you are carrying your own hurt, you can pass that hurt on very easily. And so where and how you create spaces to listen, to let them have, maybe it's not you that they can talk to, but having them speak to other people to let out whatever their frustrations are, giving them an opportunity to not just hear flaws within them, but what's good about them. What are things that they do well and successfully? And the flip side of that's important also, that you have elderly people in your life. Before my father had his stroke, I took a trip with him and my mother to Toronto, where it was just the three of us for about 4 or 5 days. And it's not that I don't like spending time with my siblings, my wife, my kids, but I haven't had that kind of time with my parents in a long time. And they had come to a conference with me, and we got to spend time together. And at the end of it, my father said to me that this was probably the 3 best days of my life. And I really love spending it with you. And then a few weeks later, he lost his ability to speak. And I wished that I had spent more time with him, but I was so grateful for the time that I had and the words that he shared with me when he still had the ability to speak. And may Allah grant him a full shifa and healing. But you don't want to get caught up on the other end of it, right? And this is where the hadith says there's reciprocity. That Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, he says that people are called abrar, the dutiful ones, the ones who give birr, because they understand that there's a right from the child to the parent as well as from the parent to the child. It goes in both directions. But to understand that the shaping of your child is going to be more heavily impacted by how you engage them as a parent. Right now, you want compassion, you want love, you want mercy. If you don't know how to do it, you got to ask somebody to help you, because you don't want to think that you're saying something because it sounds like it makes sense in your head, but is being received totally differently by the child. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes, it was
It
very.
is. I'm sorry, before we go to next question, do we have other question? I just want to read from YouTube. I really enjoyed the topic and there were many things I learned. Thank you for making this valuable program. It means a lot to me and my family. Brother, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and your family. So this is kind of summary feedback. I just want to put this one as a, a prayer for your family, brother, especially for your father. Go ahead, sister. Go ahead, sister, for the next question.
Yes, we will keep your father in our prayers. And moving on to our final question, it is: have you ever lived in a Muslim majority country, and how do you compare the American Muslims and the Muslim in American in a? I'm sorry, let me repeat that. And how do you compare the American Muslims and the Muslims in a Muslim majority country?
When I was younger, we used to go visit my family overseas for 3-4 months at a time. But I don't really compare Muslims in America to Muslims elsewhere in the sense of what would be the metric of a assessment, right? There's a certain beauty in Islam that appealed to me when I was younger that made me want to be Muslim, that the God centricity of it, that puts Allah at the center and says that all of us can be connected in a sphere because Allah is the anchor. And if Allah is the God of everyone, then everyone's entitled to have a relationship with Allah. And so we all become connected through that belief in La ilaha illallah. And where Islam is beautiful is that it has a malleability that allows for Islam in China to look Chinese, Islam in Turkey to look Turkish, Islam in Nigeria to look Nigerian, Islam in whatever country it is to synergize with the prevailing culture and norms. The challenge in the United States is that you have Muslims from all of those countries in this country, and where people can come together on shared culture and shared ethnicity, and they have their own challenges. We have to deal with diversity in a different way. But I think there's an opportunity in that to really then embrace Islam, where we can come together on the level of shared internals and not shared externals. And we can grow and deepen in our own horizons and perspectives by seeing that this world that we live in has many different worlds of experience in it. And it's just about us spending time with others who are different from us. I've been to a lot of different countries in the world, and I've been with many different people, and it's remarkable. And I would say that the blessing of being able to see just how different and diverse communities are have really helped to shape for me a lot of how I understand just the world and everything that goes on within it. But I wouldn't know how to compare Muslims in the United States to Muslims elsewhere, because the basis of the comparison could be so many things. Are we comparing on a socioeconomic level? Are we comparing on an educational level? Are we comparing on a level of, demographical understanding, cultural makeup, political leanings? Are we looking at it through what metric of assessment? If we're looking at it a metric of assessment that says people are better Muslims in one place or the other, that's just not a thing. Like, you can't even gauge that. How would one assess that? Because ours is not a religion that utilizes quantifiable metrics to determine someone's proximity to God. It uses qualified metrics. We literally have hadith where women who are known prostitutes are given entrance into paradise because they give thirsty animals water. That's just what it is. And at a face value, we would say, whoa, that's not something that somebody should do. But Allah's mercy is not something that we can fathom, nor is his love. And we don't know where and how individuals have a deep connection to God. And what we might sometimes perceive to be a deep connection isn't what it actually is. Character is a really important thing. And that would be a prism through which I would say subjectively and introspectively we want to engage in our relationship with Allah. But I wouldn't know how to compare people here to elsewhere.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, I would like to thank you, our brother. Hopefully, it's not gonna be last, but hopefully it will be first. We have good feedbacks, and thank you for joining our program tonight. It was great to have all of you here with us. Special thanks to Imam Khalid Latif for his heart, mind, and eye-opening speech. And thank you to Imam Ismail Kamit, for a beautiful Quran recitation. With that, I would like to conclude this program, and I want to thank our sisters that they are helping us for the Q&A session. May Allah help them in their college years and contribute to society in a much, much, much better level than our present Muslims, and make us proud.
Can
So
we have
hopefully,
prayer by the Imam to conclude the day, brother?
yes, yeah, we will have it. We will have it. I'm just finishing this. So this program is broadcasted on YouTube, and once program ends, video will be available on YouTube channel, which many people listen there. And I also try to put highlights in the chat section. If you have any privacy concern, but at the same time want to listen, feel free to drop now. So Imam, mic is yours. Inshallah, we want to pray with you. Inshallah, may Allah accept our prayers, including for your father.
Amen. Allahumma ameen. Allahumma laka alhamdu kama yanbaghi liwajhika wa azimi sultanik. لك الحمد حمدا طاهرا طيبا مباركا فيه ليوم الدين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وفي الآخرين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم إنك عفو كريم تحب العفو فاعف عنا. يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك. اللهم اجعلنا من المخلصين. اللهم اجعلنا من المخلصين. اللهم اجعلنا من المخلصين. Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, Ya Arham Ar-Rahimin, most merciful of those who show mercy, help us to see ourselves the way that you see us. Help us to look past the forms and the externals and make us those who watch over our hearts so that our hearts may watch over us. Awaken the vision of those hearts so we are enabled to find meaning, understanding, and purpose in everything taking place around us. With those wakeful hearts, give us an unbounded courage that helps us to meet every challenge that comes our way and in the way of all people in these days of social distancing, isolation, and illness. For those who are facing any type of difficulty or distress at this time, send upon them and all of us your divine peace, Ya Salam. Send them only those who will be their helpers and supporters, and protect them from any further affliction, anxiety, or anguish. Open their hearts to receive all of the love that we are sending them on this day, and envelop them and us in your divine love always, Ya Wadud. Grant them peace, relax their fears, and remove from them any impediment that keeps them from doing all that they are able to do. The burdens of life sometimes seem too heavy to bear. The anxiety and anguish that sits inside of us feels bigger at times than the world around us. We seem to be surrounded by a darkness that is impenetrable. Today we ask you, for the sake of all people who need us to be better than our best, to make us from the courageous. Our struggles are real, but your promise is true. Indeed, with hardship there always comes ease. Remove from our hearts any fears or inhibitions, and replace them with an ever-increasing boldness to live each moment as best as we can. Make us those who value people over profit. Make our pursuits rooted in love, motivated by an unconditional compassion, and manifest in acts of mercy intended to achieve nothing other than a common good. Let us never be those who hope of gaining some part of this world, or a fear of losing some aspect of it causes us to deny the rights of others, or not share from what we have at a time when so many around us have nothing. The difficulties and hardships of the days that surround us create deep opportunities for revelations of all kinds. It has shown us the potential for greed and selfishness that exists amongst those whose only interest is their self-interest. It has shown us the beauty and courage of those who stand day in and day out at the front lines against it. It has shown us inequity in its ugliest of forms and how race and class still dictate who has and who has not. And it has shown us who we are based off of our responses to everything it has revealed. Help us, Ya Allah, to find meaning in these revelations, whether they are revelations of comfort or discomfort. Help us to carry with us always each other and to remember all those who surround us with examples to aspire towards. Every doctor, nurse, and hospital staff member who risks their own health and well-being in order to save the lives of others. Every pharmacist, grocery store worker, emergency services provider who reports to work to provide for our basic needs. Every delivery person and messenger, postal worker and driver who faces the virus every day so that we might not have further disruption to our daily routines. Every donor and contributor who has given to help those in need. Every person who has decided to eat a little less so that their neighbor would not go hungry. Every young person who has picked up a phone and talked to someone elderly so that they wouldn't feel alone. Every person who has sought to bring change into their own life as a way to bring beneficial change in the lives of others. Help us to carry always those who help facilitate for us and to honor their sacrifices and struggles by making sacrifices of our own. Help us to understand that our role in this pandemic is not to simply sit at home and do nothing. But if we are in solitude, then let our solitude be a means of growth and change so we can recognize all that we can offer to so many who find themselves in hardship, difficulty, strife, and pain. Motivate us to not end this day or any tomorrow that we see without first bringing some benefit to someone else. Whether it is a call to check in on someone we know is alone, $1 that we donate so that someone else has provision, a prayer that we utter that comes from our heart, anything that we have capacity to do, make openings for us and grant us the vision needed to see and take advantage of those openings. When we look back to these days of social isolation, make us those who look back with full assurance, knowing that we did everything we could in our capacity to help others and did not leave anything behind. Where people are passing away and many more are falling ill, where so many have lost jobs and have no means for rent, food, clothing, or anything at all, where government has failed over and over again, where dying individuals will ask their doctors how much they will have to pay for getting intubated because their worry from no health care is greater than the pain caused by corona, where refugees sit in camps filled to the brims and there is no room for social distancing, where the incarcerated sit in infected prisons despite their infractions being tied to actions that are no longer considered a crime, where the undocumented are not considered human enough to receive a stimulus check, where there is so much to be done in these days, and there is no shortage of opportunity to be a means of strength, hope, love, and light for so many. Make us those who, when we look back, we have full assurance that we did everything we could for others who needed us to be better than our best, and that we did not leave anything behind at all. If we did not live goodness today, Ya Rab, then make us those who bring goodness to your creation tomorrow. If we did good today, Ya Allah, then make us those who do better tomorrow. Where everyone else might point fingers and blame, make us those who see our role in the healing, and let our actions speak louder than anything anyone says. Where there is distress and agony, make us the source of calm. Where there is hate and bigotry, make us the source of love, compassion, and wisdom. Where there is indifference and intolerance, make us the source of consciousness and understanding. Make us the answer to people's prayers and those who only do what is good. When our hearts are heavy and they are filled with darkness, bring people to us who illuminate them through kindness, compassion, and love. Make us always the reason that people have hope in this world, and never the reason that people might dread it. For all those who find themselves ill, make this ailment for them a means of purification in this world and a means of elevation in the next. Grant each one a complete healing and shifa. each one a quick and easy recovery. For all those who have lost loved ones in these days of Corona, bring ease to their hearts and let every tear that they have shed raise their loved ones in rank and degree over and over again. Make them from the shuhada and help us to remember them always. You are always with us, Ya Allah. Though we cannot see you, we know that you see us and that you are always by our side, that you love us more than we can know when you know each tear that we have cried. We trust in you. Guide us and hold us until we are recovered and well. Relieve us of all pain and free us from any suffering. Help us to obtain strength for the sake of the weary, hope for those who are discouraged, and joy for each and every one who is downhearted. Protect us always from hearts that are not humble, tongues that are not wise, and eyes that have forgotten how to cry. Forgive us for our shortcomings and guide and bless us all. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
Thank you very much for this wonderful prayer, Imam. May Allah, inshallah, help us to help others. And I just want to remind you one more time that we have can we bring the advertisement for the book contest that we are going to have? Inshallah, deadline is January 25th, I believe. So if we want to make a book club, January 24th, 2020 contest date, please register before you start to read books. Please, I think Life of the Prophet and Reflection on the Prophet Muhammad will always help us to understand we need him more than ever. We need him more than his wisdom. We need his wisdom practices more than ever. We are also encouraging our young audience to participate, your friends, your brothers and sisters, little brothers and sisters, up to 14 years. They can also read this book on the screen and participate for this program. Again, this is open to all North America for everyone. Inshallah, if Brother Imam Khalid is available, we want to make some book club regarding to Martin Link's, one for young generation, one for the Martin Link's book, for 5 weekly, once a week, book club for Muhammad, his life based on the early sources by Martin Link's. If you like to participate in this Zoom book club, I just typed the email nj@neicc.net. Again, thank you very much for everyone participating. Imam, I would like to thank you again. I would like to thank our beautiful sisters who work tirelessly, Sister Neval and Sister Elif Betül and others. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much. Have a good night, everybody.